runway 29. Use taxi strip directly in front of you.
Runway 29, roger.
Brakes for taxiing as little as possible. This holds good for any two-engined airplane. And when you want to turn, use your outboard engine. Always taxi with your flaps up. Set brakes and proceed to make check. Your oil pressure should be at normal, and cylinder head temperature must be over 100 degrees. Now check one engine at a time. See that the prop is at high RPM, and put mixture control in auto rich. Open your throttle briefly to about 40 inches to clean the engine out. Then, reduce manifold pressure to 30 inches. RPM should be from 1950 to 2100. Check your ammeter. It ought to show charge. Next, turn off one magneto. Your loss of RPM should not exceed 100. Now make a quick check on the other mag. Running an engine at high manifold pressure on one mag may cause serious detonation. Next, test the prop circuit breakers. Pull the prop governor control lever back from its high RPM setting until it drops 200. Advance the prop control to the original setting. Use the feather switch to check the prop. When RPM starts to drop, switch back to normal position. Put the prop selector switch in decrease. As soon as RPM drops 200, move the switch to increase. When the RPM goes back to 2100, put the switch in automatic. Now go through the same procedure for the other engine. And then you're ready for the final check. Fuel booster pumps at high. Fuel pressure between 15 and 19 pounds per square inch. Prop circuit breakers down. Prop switches at automatic. Prop controls at high RPM. Mixture auto rich. Intercooler flaps closed. Upper cowl flaps closed. Lower cowl flaps open about 1/4. Wing flaps 1/3 down. Gyro instruments uncaged. Oil temperature should be between 40 and 90 degrees centigrade. Oil pressure 75 to 90 pounds per square inch at 2,000 RPM. Cylinder heads between 120 to 205 degrees centigrade. Hydraulic and accumulator pressure 800 to 1,100 pounds per square inch. Now you're ready to scramble. Yes, the P-61A takes off like a homesick angel. But flying the P-61B is smoother and even more efficient, with these latest modifications giving her top performance. A rack for night binoculars, a new wrinkle in night fighting, an electrically operated accessory panel, push-button type circuit breakers, 2 improved heating units, trim tab removed from aileron, landing gear with a neutral position. In the down position, a lock prevents the gear from being raised accidentally. Main gear nacelle doors close with wheels down. Taxi lights on the nose wheel. Now let's go upstairs and watch another P-61 go through its paces. A YP in this case. The ship takes off at about 105 miles an hour, indicated without flaps. She'll fly herself off the ground. But now let's see how the P-61 takes off with flaps. Using quarter flaps provides another normal takeoff. Notice that the nose need be raised very little. But if you ever have to take off from a bombed field in a hurry, use 2/3 flaps. Keep nose wheel on ground until you have flying speed, then pull her loose. Climb a few feet and level off to gain speed. The P-61 will take off in a short space if you handle her correctly. Here's another way to clear an obstacle at the end of the runway. Flaps down 2/3 again. But this time, stay on the ground as long as possible, gaining all the speed you can. Then pull up steeply and keep climbing until the obstacle is cleared. 140 miles per hour gives you the best rate of climb, but 160 is generally recommended for normal operation. The higher speed keeps the engine running cooler. For normal cruising, use 2230 RPM or less. Manifold pressure, 29 to 34.5 inches in auto lean. Oil temperature, 60 to 85 degrees centigrade. Oil pressure, 60 to 90 pounds per square inch. Fuel pressure, 15 to 17 pounds per square inch. Cylinder head temperature, about 210 degrees centigrade. Generator voltage, 28 to 28.5. Amps, 200 maximum each when using turret and all radio equipment. Shift the supercharger every 3 hours to prevent accumulation of sludge. The Widow is very easy to get along with. She won't give you any trouble on turns. Climbs like a monkey. Dives well. Here she is doing a chandelle. A stall at about 95 miles per hour with flaps up and power off. The response and effectiveness of elevator and rudders is completely normal. Elevator forces are exceptionally light for a ship of its size due to the spring-loaded tabs. Failure of either engine in flight isn't a problem if you follow the proper procedure. Hit the feathering switch, then close the throttle. Move the mixture control to idle cutoff. Turn the fuel supply of the dead engine off. Snap the ignition switch off after the prop stops rotating. Put the live engine in auto rich. And trim your rudder tab. Close the cowl flaps on the dead engine all the way. And finally, close the oil cooler flaps and intercooler shutter on the dead engine. Even when stalled on one engine, the Black Widow isn't in trouble. On one engine, you can turn in either direction if you maintain safe single-engine airspeed, have your plane trimmed properly, and remember coordination. And don't be timid about racking her around. You can even do vertical banks into the dead engine if you keep her at proper flying speed. To unfeather is equally simple. Turn the ignition switch on with the throttle closed. Set the prop control lever to the decrease RPM position. Turn on the fuel supply. Move the mixture control to auto rich. Set the feathering switch to normal position and hold the selector switch in the increase RPM until your engine speed reaches 800 RPM. Then release the selector switch. When minimum engine operating temperatures have been reached, place selector switches in automatic. And finally, adjust mixture, throttle, and prop levers to the desired power and engine RPM and retrim the ship. In case of both fuel and booster pump failure on one of the engines, turn on cross-feed valve and the booster pump of the operating engine to high. If, in an emergency, you need the absolute maximum performance, use the water injection, which is found on most P-61s. Just shove the throttles all the way open. That turns on the pumps. And then push the water injection switch. That sends the water into the engine. To use the autopilot, turn on the pressure valve. Pressure should be between 100 and 125 pounds per square inch. Trim the ship so it'll fly hands off. Uncage the gyro pilot instruments. Line up the control indices. First the rudder. Then the aileron. And last, the elevator. Set the speed valve at 2 or 3. Now turn on the autopilot. And finally, if necessary, readjust the indices for level flight. Well, I guess we've been up long enough. Let's head for the barn. Turn the autopilot and cockpit heaters off. Check to see that de-icer and anti-icer are off. Turret stowed. Fuel fullest tank. Cross feed valve off. Mixture auto rich. Fuel booster pumps high. Supercharger neutral. When airspeed drops below 175, lower gear and check it. Hydraulic and accumulator pressure, 800 to 1,100 pounds per square inch. Props, automatic and set for 2,400 RPM. And lower your flaps. Retrim the elevators. Check brake pressure with your toe. Approach at not less than 110 miles an hour. Touch down at about 90 miles an hour. Tail down. That was a landing with 3/4 flaps. Let's go back and look at some other types. If you want to use less runway, for example, just lower the flaps all the way. Remember, you have a lot more drag with full flaps, so come in with a little more power. The P-61 was designed with a large area of flaps for slow landings at night. If you're forced to land on a short runway, make a power approach. Use full flaps and fly the airplane quite slowly. You'll have to keep considerable power to prevent stalling, but the ship will get down in less than 1,000 feet this way. For a single-engine landing, bank into the good engine if practicable when you enter the traffic pattern. Lower the wheels just after you turn into the approach, but don't lower the flaps until you're sure of making the field. Use some power on the good engine. Try to make your approach as normal as possible. If you're going faster than normal, fly the plane onto the ground and use the brakes rather than holding it off to lose the excess speed. Some pilots prefer to make a landing with no power. It may be done with full flaps. The glide must be quite steep in order to maintain airspeed, and the flare should be started rather high so the plane won't mush into the ground. But now let's see what happens after the wheels are on the ground. Hold the nose off the ground as long as possible in order to spare the brakes. After you complete the landing run and come to a stop, be sure the cowl flaps are open and raise the wing flaps. Idle the engines at 1,000 to 1,200 RPM until cylinder head temperatures drop below 205 degrees centigrade. Mixture should be auto-rich, and all cowl flaps open. Advance throttle to 25 inches and pull her back, cleaning out the engine. Now move the mixture to idle cutoff and advance throttles to full open as the engines die. Turn off all switches. Hold brakes until chocks are under each wheel, then release. Finally, lock the controls. Well, that ends your first lesson in learning how to fly the Black Widow. You have a long way yet to go, but it's usually a case of love at first flight. She's that kind of an airplane.